Well, hello everyone. Sorry I'm running a little bit late. One thing I'm doing is, since I'm broadcasting this video from the group Tantric Yoga Now, and since not everybody is a member of that group, I changed the group settings to public right before the broadcast and then change it to closed again right after the broadcast. And I'm not sure if I actually need to do that. I wonder if someone who knows more about Facebook can find out if people outside the group can see the video if it's broadcast from the group, even though the group is closed. Anyway, we'll find out about that. So now we are getting to the real meat of the philosophical verses of the Svabodha-mañjarī. And so this is verses 6 through 10, really. I actually mislabeled it in the title of this video. Yeah, verses 6 through 10. That's where we are. I hope to get through all those verses fairly quickly because it's sort of one single concept. And I call this section the postmodern philosophy section of the text because it's very much aligned with certain elements within 20th century postmodern philosophy, especially French. Just coincidentally, of course, there was no influence of these philosophers upon late 20th century French philosophers, but there is an interesting sort of alignment and parallelism you'll see in the sort of deconstructionism that we get in these very interesting verses, which are again, very, very close to Buddhist philosophy. And as I mentioned before, the Krama or Mahārtha lineage is, within Shaiva Tantra, the closest lineage to Buddhism, and often simply overlaps with Buddhist philosophy in many ways, and in other ways doesn't. But you know, in certain texts, it's hard to see any significant difference. And I think this is not something that bothered them very much, because the tantrikas, these non-dual, radically non-dual goddess-worshipping tantrikas, were sort of famous for rejecting the mainstream Hindu religion. Now, they didn't have the word Hindu at that time, or the concept Hindu, but they did have the word Vaidika, meaning the Vedic religion, right? The Brahminical religion. And these non-dual tantrikas explicitly rejected the Vedic religion, not culturally. They thought it was, you know, a valid sort of cultural institution, but they claimed that the Vedic religion or the Brahminical religion could not actually affect spiritual liberation, so that it had cultural value, not spiritual value. And so I think that as you know, due to this willingness to reject the mainstream religion, which most other Shaivas didn't have, and Vaishnavas didn't have at this time, they were also able to sort of, without misgivings, ally themselves with some Buddhist philosophers, or at least engage in a respectful conversation with Buddhist philosophers. Anyway, so that's enough about that for now. Historical details. Let's look at the spiritual teachings here in this fascinating text. And once again, we're not yet to the actual practices, and the text is mainly practice. It's about practices. It's a whole bunch of practices. So for those who are really interested in that, it's just a couple more videos, a couple more weeks, and we'll get to these practice materials and these practice verses. Okay, so let's look at the verse 6. That's where we're actually at, not verse 5 as I said in the label of the video. So verse 6 goes, Shukra shonita samshlesha kale nasti manah kvachit na budbude na peshyam va na sharire kvachit sthitam. When the semen and menstrual fluid is mixed, producing the zygote. The mind is nowhere to be found. It is not in the embryo, nor in the fetus. It exists nowhere in the body. Very interesting verse. I'll put it in the comments section so you can read it for yourself. So what he's trying to say here is that the mind is itself a mental construct. That is to say, mind is a concept. It's not a static, specific, independent, or objectifiable thing. And so he's trying to say, you know, it's like this mind, it's not, we can't cut you open and find it the way we can cut you open and find your liver, let's say. So there's a couple of sort of problems with the verse, mainly that in 1,000 years ago in India, they had a much more sophisticated and accurate understanding of human conception than Europe did at the same time, but still not a completely accurate conception. So specifically, they thought 1,000 years ago in India that the zygote, you know, the thing that would become the embryo and then the fetus, right, what we would call a fertilized egg, they believed that this was actually from the fusion of the shukra, the semen of the man, and the shonita, the menstrual blood of the woman. So they thought these two came together to produce life. And of course, this was not an unreasonable mistake to make, because indeed, you know, when a woman is shedding her uterine lining in the form of, you know, what we call menstrual blood, that's also when the egg is shed, right? So there is some kind of vague understanding anyway that something was embedded in this material that gets shed at the time of menstruation that had something to do with conception. So anyway, biological details aside, you know, the facts of the matter wouldn't change his point here, which is that, again, there's no, you know, mind itself is a mental construct. That's his point. So we don't find the mind in the zygote. We don't find it in the embryo. We don't find it in the fetus. And then we don't find it in the body once a person has been born either. So this, I think this verse has to be understood, again, in connection with the following verses. This is sort of what this little section is all very interconnected, unlike many of the other verses in the text, which can stand alone, okay? So let's go on to the next verses. I'm just wondering, are we having any technological problems? Seems like the image is a little choppy. What I'm really hoping is that the sound is uninterrupted. Can you guys make a little comment about whether you're able to hear clearly and see decently? Okay, let's move on. So I'll put this, I'll actually paste it first so you can follow along. How about that? Okay, great. So let's go on to verses 7 and 8. Shariram garbhavasanta kaumare yauvane tata kshanakshayī vinashantam tacha naivopalabhyate pratagnama pratagrupam lomadinam pratakstitihi pratak sarvam yatha drishtam kashariram tadastitam. Whether it is newborn, juvenile, or youthful, let alone in older life, elder life, the body is decaying in every moment, ending in its complete destruction. It cannot be grasped as a thing in itself. Name is one thing. Form or appearance is another. Its parts, such as hair and so on, each have their separate existence and name. The whole can be broken down indefinitely into separate parts, as we can see. So where is the body as an independent thing? So let's get into these points that Vīranātha is making. So he's observing that even when the body is young, let alone when it's old, the body is decaying in every moment. And we now know this to be true. And it's quite impressive insight on his part 1,000 years ago, because we know that cells are dying all the time, even in, a baby's body, and they have to be replaced all the time. And the main difference biologically between a younger body and an older body is that the cell replication process starts to slowly break down and be less effective and less efficient, and the copying of the DNA is less accurate, due to the what's colloquially called the fraying of the ends of the chromosomal strands, the telomeres. This is the subject of some research right now, because it's being hypothesized that if we could actually prevent the replication process from losing its integrity, our bodies could last indefinitely long. Now, from a spiritual point of view, I don't imagine that this is a very good idea. Humans living for hundreds of years. But anyway, it is a serious topic of debate right now in the biological sciences. There's a guy at Cambridge, Aubrey de Grey, who's working on this. Very interesting. He has a TED Talk. Anyway, I'm getting off topic perhaps a little bit, but the point is, Vīranātha was right that cells are always dying, and that they have to be replaced, and that replication process not being perfect is what causes aging, and there's ultimately destruction of the body. And what he's saying here in his way, because he's working in 32 syllable verses, is that's the one thing we can be sure of. Not if Aubrey de Grey gets his way, but almost definitely that's the one thing we can be sure of, that the body will die. Actually, even if we live much longer in the future, still the body will die eventually. So I think he's right to say that's the one complete certainty. And therefore, to cling to it as a locus of identification is crazy. Not only because it will die, but because it actually already is dying. It's constantly being replaced, and all the cells get replaced. And so how could it possibly be you if you consider yourself as something that's existed for your whole life, and yet all the cells of your body have been replaced? So this is very much the point he's making. But he goes on to make a more important point, I think, when he says pratagnama pratagrupam lomadinam pratakstitihi, that okay, so we can analyze with our minds the body into all these distinct parts: name, appearance, the various parts of the body, the skin, the hair, the eyes, the muscles, the ligaments, the connective tissue, the bones, and so on and so forth. He has all that in mind here. And that we can actually break down this thing that appears to be a thing indefinitely. And so this is another quite accurate intuition on his part, in the sense that he didn't know in a literal sense that you can break it down indefinitely. You can get to the level of cells, which he didn't know about, tissues and then cells, and then you can go deeper and get eventually to the level of molecules, and then atoms, and then subatomic particles, and then quarks, and it's just never ending how you can break it down. And then if you do that kind of even as a thought experiment, where is this body? There's no separate independent object called body, because if it's constantly being replaced and recycled, both on the molecular and atomic level, in terms of atoms getting replaced, and on the cellular level, which is macro compared to the micro of the atoms, if it's being replaced on all these levels, how is it a thing? This is a kind of more complex version of the philosopher's axe problem, if you're familiar with that. I won't go into it. You can look it up. It's like, is it still the same axe? I've replaced this part, I replaced that part, but I still think of it as the same, but it's not. So, my axe, that's a mental construct. My body, that's a mental construct. Okay, so I have a little note here on this. I put a note here. It says, since each thing has its separate name and apparent separate existence from the perspective of the analytical mind, we're talking about the analytical mind can endlessly break it down into parts, but each part has no unique svabhava, meaning essence, and the body itself. More importantly, the body has no unique svabhava. It has no essence of its own, independent from the whole world of which it is a part and a manifestation. So the drawing of the boundary by which one calls a certain collocation of percepts, like hair, skin, nails, appearance, and name, calling that collocation of percepts my body, and everything else not my body, is arbitrary, at least to some extent, in the sense that it's a mental construct to draw this line or boundary where no such boundary exists. Okay, so if we're only looking at the very most superficial level, stula level in Sanskrit, then we can imagine the body as a thing separate from